We invite you to participate in a week-long study class on the wonderful prophecies fulfilled by the coming of Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i Faith. The study class is conducted by Hand of the Cause William Sears. So let us begin the first day with a song that tells the story of the entire study class, assuring us that the Promised One has come.
Live in the glory of God. Live in the glory of God. In the name of His glory and His everlasting story, let's live in the glory of God. For He has come. Yes, He has come. Oh, the promised one has come. Baha'u'llah is the glory who was promised in the story. Baha'u'llah has come. Live in the glory of God. Live in the glory of God. And the heart will be lighter and His kingdom will be brighter. Let's live in the glory of God. For He has come. Yes, He has come. Oh, the promised one has come. Baha'u'llah is the glory who was promised in the story. Baha'u'llah has come.
Hello there, I'm Bill Sears. That song is what this study class is all about. The Promised One has come. I was thinking the other day, what could I do to help all the wonderful new Baha'is who are entering the Baha'i Faith in such great numbers these days? How could I help them to bring in more thousands, many more thousands of Baha'is in every one of their villages, towns, cities, and countrysides? And I decided that Marguerite and I, Marguerite Sears, she's my wife, you probably know that. She's the one who taught me about the faith of Baha'u'llah and helped me to become a Baha'i. I thought perhaps that Marguerite and I could tell all of you the thrilling and dramatic story about the fulfillment of prophecy from the sacred scriptures of the past, which took place when Baha'u'llah came into the world. A wonderful story. And after hearing these marvelous prophecies, those people that you are teaching may want to become Baha'is too, just as soon as they can.
That's what happens to all of us, you know. Hearing about Baha'u'llah is like being present on the mountainside when Christ talked to the people.
Yes, you believe. I mean, you really believe in Him. You know it's the truth. You want to be a part of it just as soon as you can. When this study class is over, you will have heard all you need to know to become a follower of Baha'u'llah, a Baha'i. In fact, you have heard enough by the time the first half is over, the first 3 days. And you may want to join this radiant spiritual army of Baha'u'llah. Well, that's up to you.
Please click like for this video and subscribe for more great content.
Let me give you a sample of the excitement we're about to share together. Prophecy.
Ezekiel, chapter 43, verse 4. And the glory of the Lord came into the house by way of the gate, whose prospect is toward the east.
Baha'u'llah's name in English means the glory of the Lord, or the glory of God. And He did come to Israel from the east. Baha'u'llah's birthplace in Tehran, Persia, is directly east of Israel. And He did come by way of the gate. Isn't that fascinating? Baha'u'llah, like Christ before Him, had a herald, a forerunner. Christ had John the Baptist. Baha'u'llah had a young man, a wonderful young man called the Bab. He was a prophet in his own right. He prepared the way for Baha'u'llah, just as it was foretold would happen in the scriptures. The Bab's name, spelled B-A-B, when translated into English means the gate. Baha'u'llah, the glory of God, came to the Holy Land from the east by way of the Bab, the gate. But that's only the beginning. Still Ezekiel. Prophecy.
Chapter 43, verse 2. And behold, the glory of the God of Israel came from the way of the east, And his voice was like a noise of many waters, and the earth shined with his glory.
Baha'u'llah, whose name means the glory of God, came from the East. He wrote over 100 volumes. His name is known now in more than 316 countries, territories, and islands, and in over 50,000 places in the world his faith is established. Probably even more now as we're talking, so fast is this Baha'i faith spreading. All this has taken place in just a little over 100 years. Imagine that. Imagine how the earth has shined with Baha'u'llah's glory. That's what Baha means, glory. Prophecy.
Jeremiah, chapter 49, verse 38. And I will set my throne in Elam, and will destroy from thence the king and the princes, saith the Lord.
Jeremiah says this will take place in the latter days. And where does Jeremiah say God will set his throne? In Elam. Elam was once part of the land which we know as Persia, Iran, the birthplace of both Baha'u'llah and his herald, the Bab. That's interesting, isn't it? Baha'u'llah wrote many letters and messages to the kings of the world at that time, too. He warned them that they would lose their kingdoms and their power if they did not do the work of God and protect their people. Well, they did not, and their kingdoms were destroyed.
You can read that story or hear about it in a book called The Promised Days Come. The kings were punished because of their own heedless actions, just as Baha'u'llah said they would be.
There are other books written about this dramatic story of Baha'u'llah's letters to the kings, too. You can read them yourself or have someone read these marvelous stories to you. It will be a fascinating and unique experience. Kingdom after kingdom falls, exactly as foretold by Baha'u'llah and by the prophets of old. It happened as Jeremiah said it would happen, in the day when God would set his throne in Elam, Persia, and would destroy the wicked rulers. Now, let's examine a few prophecies from some of the lesser-known books. Prophecy.
And then from the sunrise, God shall send a king who shall give every man release from the bane of war. Nor shall he do these things by his own counsel, but in obedience to the good ordinances of the mighty God.
That prophecy is from the ancient Jewish writings. The Jewish author Joseph Klausner, in his book The Messianic Idea in Israel, says that this king from the sunrise is without any doubt the King Messiah. Those are his words. Baha'u'llah came to Israel from the sunrise, from the east. The world center of the Baha'i Faith is established in Israel. The kingdom of Baha'u'llah is now spreading into all parts of the world. Isn't that a fascinating story? All right. Prophecy.
If there is but 1 minute remaining in the whole world, I will send someone from this nation, Persia, who will renew religion.
Imagine that. And that's from one of the traditional sacred prophecies of Zoroaster, the messenger of God for the Zoroastrian people. It's from the book of narrated, called Religious Debates. Here's another.
When Persia and the other countries are overtaken by the Arabs, I will choose one from the generation of the kings of Persia, so that he will call the people of the world from east to west to worship one God.
The guardian of the Baha'i Faith, Shoghi Effendi, tells us in God Passes By, one of his books, that Baha'u'llah was descended from the line of the Sasanian dynasty of the kings of Persia. Baha'u'llah was also descended from Zoroaster, he says. In the writings of more than one faith, Persia has been given a special place for the last days. Although the Bible scholars couldn't say why. They would say, Persia has a special place, but why, we do not know. That's almost a quotation from one of them. We, the followers of Baha'u'llah, we do know why, though, don't we? Let's go back to the Bible, to the book of Daniel. The book of Daniel led many people to discover the prophecies about the first coming of Christ. These prophecies also speak of Christ's return in the glory of the Father, Baha'u'llah. You can read some answered questions by Abdul Baha, the son of Baha'u'llah, and other books too. These books will tell you the story in detail. Here, we will touch only upon a few highlights. For example, here is another prophecy about Persia. This is from Daniel. Prophecy.
Daniel chapter 12, verse 1. And at that time there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered.
Well, we found that in the book of Matthew too, didn't we? Almost the same words. Daniel, in these same chapters, tells us about the coming of this great messenger of God. When? In the year 1844, the year of the birth of the Baha'i Faith. Many Christian Bible scholars came to this same 1844 period for the return of Christ when they studied these prophecies of Daniel. And where did Daniel make all of these wonderful prophecies? Where was he when he said these things? Well, sir, Daniel made these prophecies in Elam, in Persia. Daniel said that Persia, Elam, would be given as a place of vision in the latter days. Daniel wrote in Shushan, in ancient Persia. Shushan was the capital city of Elam, of that ancient land we know now as Persia or Iran. Another prophecy. Baha'u'llah's mission on earth lasted 40 years. It began in the Black Pit prison in Tehran, Persia. It ended with Baha'u'llah's passing in the Holy Land, Israel, some 40 years later. Joseph Klausner, in his book, The Messianic Idea in Israel, remember I mentioned the book earlier? Klausner quotes R. Eliezer Ben Hyrcanus, another respected Jewish author, as saying this:
The days of the Messiah will last 40 years.
Baha'u'llah's mission on earth lasted exactly 40 years. It's a wonderful story, isn't it? But it's only the beginning, of course. Sir Edward Irving, a Christian clergyman and Bible scholar, spent much time studying the prophecies about when Christ would return. He expected Christ to return in the 1843-45 period. Edward Irving also wrote about a prophecy that he discovered in India when he was there, about a religion that would come from the West and would possess the world in 40 years.
And Persia, of course, is west of India.
These prophecies are only a few of the least of the prophecies. Wherever we look, in whatever direction we turn, we will see proof after proof announcing the coming of Baha'u'llah. Since most of us in the West were Christians before we became Baha'is, let's talk a little bit about Christ. What did Christ himself say about Baha'u'llah? What did Jesus say about his own return? That's an important thing for us, isn't it? I mean what Christ said. So let's investigate that in our study class. And don't be alarmed at that word, study class. It sounds like it might be a lot of work, I know, but it isn't. Not really. I mean, for example, you haven't had any trouble at all so far, have you? You didn't have a thing to read at all, did you? Well, this is a study class. It's very easy and it's fun. It merely means that we're studying together about the coming of the promised one for all ages, Baha'u'llah, the glory of God. You might call it a listening class as well as a study class.
Well, of course, later on you will want to know much more about Baha'u'llah, and the Baha'is will tell you everything you want to know, so that you too can become a Baha'i.
That's right. These prophecies are only the beginning. I mean, you'll talk about it yourselves after each session and discuss it more. It's only a beginning. But what a beginning. Now, let's get back to our prophecies and see what Christ himself told us about his return. For that's what Baha'u'llah is, make no mistake about that. Baha'u'llah is the return of Christ. And the sooner the Christian world recognizes this truth and accepts it, and joins together with the Baha'is to spread the good news, the sooner will we have that better world that Christ himself promised us in his Lord's Prayer. The day when God's kingdom on earth would be established, and God's will would be done on earth as it is in heaven. So it's up to us, the Baha'is, to tell everyone that the kingdom of God on earth has begun, and that this is what the Baha'is everywhere are building. It is the inception, the very beginning of the Christ-promised kingdom of God on earth. Baha'u'llah himself said that, and so did his son Abdul-Baha, and so did his great-grandson Shoghi Effendi, the guardian of the Baha'i Faith, and so does our Supreme Universal House of Justice, that supreme infallible body which guides our destinies today.
And remember, whenever you form a new local Baha'i assembly, you are helping to bring the Christ-promised kingdom of God on earth closer to reality.
And isn't that something wonderful to work for? Especially for those of us who have been Christians in the past. It means we're doing the work that His Holiness Christ wanted us to do. So tell your neighbors the good news. Christ has returned. Let them become part of the joyous work. If they are ready, they are welcome. All right. Now, let's talk about specific prophecies. Christ made 3 distinct promises to his disciples, promises that were meant for the whole world. Jesus told his followers exactly when he would return. There was no doubt about it. Let's see what those 3 promises were. Chapter 24, verse 3 of Matthew. These are the words of the Bible now. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, Tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming, and of the end of the world? Well, that's plain enough, isn't it? When will Christ return? What did he say himself? Prophecy.
Matthew 24th chapter, verse 14. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come.
When the gospel of Christ is preached in all the nations of the world for a witness, the end will come and Christ will return. That's Christ's own prophecy. This is what he told his disciples, and through them, his followers, us, in the years to come. This is what Christ told us. This is what we should look for when the gospel is preached in all the nations. Then he, Christ, would return to earth.
In the years of the 1840s, Christian Bible scholars became very interested in this prophecy. They were convinced that by the 1840s, the gospel of Christ had already spread around the world, so Christ should return any minute.
By 1844, the gospel was being taught even in the interior of Africa. In the book Thief in the Night, which I wrote some time ago, I devoted several pages to the fulfillment of this prophecy. I'll only mention one here. It is from a Christian Bible scholar, not a Baha'i. In his book, Our Day in the Light of Prophecy, written concerning the period of the 1840s, Spicer, the author, S-P-I-C-E-R, wrote that the gospel of Christ in his day had been spread to most of the inhabitants of the earth. A similar prophecy about the time of the return of Christ is given also in the book of Mark, chapter 13, verse 10, which informs us that,
And the gospel must first be published among all the nations, and then Christ will return.
This prophecy of Christ had indeed already been fulfilled by the time of the 1840s. By the year 1844, the year of the birth of the Baha'i Faith, the gospel of Christ had been published widespread among the nations, and had reached into every part, almost every part of the world. So we see that the first promise of Christ was fulfilled by the year 1844, the year of the birth of the Baha'i Faith, the faith of Baha'u'llah. In that same chapter, Mark 13, verse 33, Christ warns his followers to be awake and to watch for that day. He said,
Take ye heed, watch and pray, for ye know not when the time is.
Now, after more than a century, many of the Christians are still waiting, although the Baha'i Faith came over 100 years ago and fulfilled so exactly this first promise of Christ. Thank God that you have not waited, but are ready to hear Baha'u'llah's wonderful words, that you are one of the sheep who Christ said would hear his voice. Now we come to the second promise of Christ. This second promise of Christ is from the book of Luke. Once again, the disciples asked Christ when he would return. And these are the words of the Bible now, chapter 21, verse 7. Master, but when shall these things be? And what sign will there be when these things shall come to pass? Christ warns them not to be deceived, but to read the signs in the right way, and to understand his words. Prophecy.
Luke chapter 21, verse 24. And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles, until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled.
And that's the prophecy.
That tomorrow. Now, we hope that you'll have a very fruitful and exciting discussion about the prophecies which we have just shared with you today.
But remember, the best is yet to come. The more you hear about Baha'u'llah and the Baha'i Faith, the happier you will be that you are a Baha'i. We'll be with you all tomorrow.
Begin the second day of our study class on the coming of Baha'u'llah, the promise of all ages. Mr. Sears now continues with the promise which Jesus gave to his disciples in answer to their question asking when he, Christ, would return to earth.
Some time after the crucifixion of Christ, Jerusalem was destroyed by the Roman Titus. Later, the city was totally destroyed. It was plowed under and renamed. The Jews were banished. Many of them suffered exactly as Christ had foretold. They fell by the edge of the sword, they fled, they were scattered, and they were led away captive. When was the time of the Gentiles fulfilled? Let us see. After the Romans, the Muslims conquered Jerusalem. The holy city was made forbidden territory for the Jews. Until what time, do you think? Until the year 1844, the year of the beginning of the Baha'i Faith. Isn't that exciting?
In 1844, a document called the Edict of Toleration was signed. This Edict of Toleration is also mentioned by Worth Smith in his book Miracle of the Ages. He points out, in the year A.D. 1844, the Muslims, under the leadership of Turkey, were compelled by the Western powers, notably England, to grant religious toleration to all nations within their borders.
Imagine that.
This document, called the Edict of Toleration, was signed March 21st, 1844. It permitted the Jews to return to their homeland for the first time in some 12 centuries. You can read about it in history.
The Christian scholar George Townsend, sometime canon of St. Patrick's Cathedral in Dublin, Ireland, said that this prophecy about the times of the Gentiles was definitely fulfilled by the year 1844 and this Edict of Toleration. Mr. Townsend became a follower of Baha'u'llah. He was one of the Baha'i Faith's most illustrious scholars and teachers and writers. Of course, I'm giving you only a few of these marvelous prophecies. You know that. But perhaps they're more than enough to inspire those you're teaching to feel in their hearts that this is what they've been waiting for all of their lives. The more they hear, the more confident they will become that this is the truth, and that Baha'u'llah is indeed the return of Christ, the promised one. Now, let's get on with that second promise of Christ, which concerns the time of the Gentiles. This time, it's from the book of Revelation, a book that speaks constantly about the return of Christ. Christ's return, in fact, is a major theme of the whole book. Revelation also speaks about the times of the Gentiles, and tells us when the times of the Gentiles would be fulfilled. Listen. Prophecy.
Revelation chapter 11, verse 2. But the court which is without the temple, leave out, and measure it not. For it is given unto the Gentiles, and the holy city shall they tread under foot 42 months.
42 months is 3.5 years, or 1260 days. In those days, you know, they used the lunar calendar, and the year was 360 days, not 365. So 42 months makes 1260 days. The Christian Bible scholars who were studying about the return of Christ in those days agreed that in Bible prophecy a day is taken to mean a year. Thus, these Bible scholars took 1260 days to be 1260 years. At the end of that time, at the end of 1260 years, the times of the Gentiles would be fulfilled. So says the book of Revelation. These are Christian Bible scholars, mind you, not Baha'is. You will find their reasons for using a day as a year in prophecy in the Bible. You can find it in the book of Numbers, 14th chapter, verse 34, and again in Ezekiel, 4th chapter, 6th verse, and so on. We won't go into the details here. You can study that for yourself. In that same chapter of Numbers mentioned above, verse 21, the Lord says,
But as truly as I live, all the earth shall be filled with the glory of the Lord.
And that, of course, we know is the meaning of Baha'u'llah's name when translated into English, the glory of the Lord, or the glory of God. After the Romans conquered Jerusalem, the Muslims were the next to conquer it. And as George Townsend points out in his introduction to God Passes By, I'm quoting now, the strict exclusion of the Jews from their own land, enforced by the Muslims for some 12 centuries, was at last relaxed by the Edict of Toleration, and the times of the Gentiles were fulfilled. This edict was signed in 1844 That was the year of the beginning of the Baha'i Faith. And do you know what? The year 1260 of the Muslim calendar is identical with the year 1844 of the Christian calendar. Think of that. And so thus the times of the Gentiles was ended, and the second promise of Christ was fulfilled with the exactness of the stars in 1844.
The hour of Christ's return was the year 1844, the year that the Baha'i Faith, the wonderful faith of Baha'u'llah, began in the world.
So already we see that two of the promises which Christ himself gave to his disciples were fulfilled in a beautiful and marvelous way by the year 1844. No wonder people in all parts of the world are eager to become Baha'is and followers of Baha'u'llah.
That brings us to the third promise of Christ.
Yes. What about the third promise of Christ? We find this promise in the book of Matthew. When Christ's disciples asked him, "What shall be the sign of thy coming?" Jesus told them this, and this is Christ's third clear promise. Prophecy.
Matthew chapter 24, verse 15. When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place. Whoso readeth, let him understand.
Daniel, in chapters 8 through 12, deals with both the first and the second coming of Christ. You can read about this in detail in a book mentioned before called Some Answered Questions. You'll find it on pages 35 through 42. It's a wonderful book. Many more things in there, too. The book contains the words of the son of Baha'u'llah, Abdul-Baha. Here, we'll mention only one of these prophecies. Prophecy.
Daniel chapter 8, verse 14. And he said unto me, Unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed.
These things, Daniel said, would take place at the time of the end. Daniel described it as a time, and half a time. Or, in the language of prophecy, 3.5 years. A time is a year, a time's 2 years, and half a time, half a year. Or 3.5 years. And what does that make? It makes 40 and 2 months, or 1,260 days again. Daniel in chapter 8 is prophesying that 2,300 years shall pass before the sanctuary shall be cleansed. Following this time, all things will be made pure again. Before this time, the people would have fallen into a state of abomination, without love for God or man, and they would be troublemakers, haters of their fellow men, all of the things we see in the world today. But after 2,300 years, the sanctuary would be cleansed, and the hopes of men would be restored once again. Daniel links Christ and Baha'u'llah together in these remarkable prophecies. That's why the Bible scholars use these chapters not only to determine Christ's first coming, the time of his first coming, but also the time when Christ would return to the earth. Daniel said that from the issuing of the decree to rebuild Jerusalem until the cutting off of the Messiah or the crucifixion of Christ, there are appointed 490 days, or 490 years in prophecy. Both the cutting off of the Messiah, the death of Christ, and the end of the abomination of desolation begin with that same decree to rebuild Jerusalem. Scholars determine that this was the decree of the Emperor Artaxerxes issued in the year 457. And where was Artaxerxes from? From Persia. Where did Daniel have his vision? In Shushan, capital of Elam in ancient Persia. When did Daniel say all of this would take place? At the time of the end, a time which showed in his prophecies to be 1844, the year of the birth of the Baha'i Faith. Now, just listen to this. This is a Christian Bible scholar speaking. E.P. Kakamai, in a new edition of H.G. Guinness's book, Light for the Last Days, a book about prophecy. He quotes Guinness as saying the following about Daniel's prophecy.
From the first day of the Jewish month of Nisan in the year 457.
That's the year of Artaxerxes' decree, 457 B.C.
Until the first day of the month of Nisan in the year 1844.
Or the year of the birth of the Baha'i Faith, 1844.
There are exactly 2,300 years that have passed.
Abdu'l-Baha, in Some Answered Questions, pages 40-41, explains these decrees of Artaxerxes in more detail. He also shows in yet another way how this prophecy of Daniel comes to the year 1844. Imagine that. So thus, the third promise which Christ gave to his followers was also fulfilled by the year 1844, the year of the birth of the Baha'i Faith. Three important promises of Christ himself announcing the day of his return to earth.
First promise, the gospel would be preached everywhere.
Fulfilled by 1844.
Second promise, the times of the Gentiles would be fulfilled.
Also in 1844.
Third promise, the words of Daniel about the cleansing of the sanctuary.
Also fulfilled in 1844, the year of the birth of the Baha'i Faith. Is it any wonder that the Baha'is say to their Christian friends, "What are you waiting for? Christ himself told you when he would return. Christ has himself proved to you that Baha'u'llah is the true one. He said that his sheep would recognize his voice in that day. Are you listening? Christ has given you three clear-cut promises telling you exactly when he would return. Each one of them brings you to Baha'u'llah, to the Baha'i Faith, and to the year 1844. So what are you waiting for? Open your hearts and your spiritual eyes and ears. In the words of Christ himself, "Whoso readeth, let him understand." Listen again. Repeat.
The gospel of Christ had been preached everywhere in the world for a witness.
That's the first promise of Christ fulfilled. When? 1844. And Christ said, "I shall return."
The times of the Gentiles had been fulfilled.
The second promise of Christ fulfilled. When? The year 1844. And at that time Christ said, "I shall return."
The prophecy of Daniel about the abomination of desolation had been fulfilled.
The third promise of Christ fulfilled. His own three promises, the last. When? In the year 1844. At that time Christ said, "I shall return." Baha'u'llah's declaration to the world that he was the promised one was made in the valley of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, near to the site of the river Chebar, the place where the Old Testament prophet Ezekiel saw his vision of the glory of God. In that valley, Baha'u'llah wrote his book of certitude. This book, Baha'u'llah said, broke the seals of the book referred to by Daniel. This book disclosed the meaning of those words of Scripture, which were destined by Daniel to remain closed up until the time of the end. The time of the end had come. Is it any wonder that thousands all over the earth are hurrying in these days to embrace the truth of Baha'u'llah's faith and become Baha'is? What a dramatic story. The three promises of Christ himself have all been fulfilled. 1, 2, 3, all fulfilled with the exactness of the stars. And when? In the same year, 1844, the year of the coming of the Baha'i Faith, the faith of Baha'u'llah. At that time, Christ said,
he would return in the glory of the Father.
Well, isn't it long past time for all of us to go around the world and tell the world about Baha'u'llah's coming, to tell them that Christ has returned? Jesus said in that same 24th chapter of Matthew, in referring to Daniel's prophecy, that it would take spiritual eyes to see and spiritual ears to hear and understand the truth. Didn't he? Christ said, and these are his words again,
whoso readeth, let him understand.
It would take a pure heart, someone searching for the truth to understand and accept. Let us now turn to the Gospel of John. Prophecy.
John, chapter 15, verse 26. But when the Comforter is come, whom I will send unto you from the Father, even the Spirit of truth, which proceedeth from the Father, he shall testify of me.
Baha'u'llah did just that. He wrote often of Christ, lovingly, tenderly, movingly. Baha'u'llah told the Christians that he, Baha'u'llah, was that Comforter. Listen to just a few words which Baha'u'llah has written about Christ. Remember, Baha'u'llah was exiled like Abraham. He was stoned like Moses. He was scourged like Christ. He was weighted down with 100-pound chains. He was driven from city to city and persecuted almost all the adult years of his life for nearly half a century. Baha'u'llah was 2 times stoned, 3 times imprisoned, and 4 times exiled. He suffered dreadful persecutions in 4 countries, in 2 continents. Imagine that. Baha'u'llah wrote, "If ye have resolved to shed the blood of him whose coming Jesus Christ himself hath announced, behold me, standing ready and defenseless before you. Deal with me after your own desires." In another place, Baha'u'llah wrote, "If ye be intent on crucifying once again Jesus, the Spirit of God, put me to death, for he hath once more in my person been made manifest unto you. Deal with me as ye wish, for I have vowed to lay down my life in the path of God." Prophecy.
John chapter 16, verses 7 and 13. "Nevertheless I tell you the truth. It is expedient for you that I go away. For if I go not away, the Comforter will not come unto you. But if I depart, I will send him unto you."
Baha'u'llah wrote to the leaders of Christianity and told them that he was that Comforter promised by Christ. Baha'u'llah offered them all of the proofs they required. Baha'u'llah wrote, "O Pope in Rome, O concourse of patriarchs, O concourse of archbishops, O concourse of bishops, O concourse of priests, O people of the gospel, O people of Christianity." He wrote to them all. Baha'u'llah left no one out from the whole world of Christianity. To those religious leaders, Baha'u'llah said, "Ye are the stars of the heaven of my knowledge. My mercy desireth not that ye should fall upon the earth." That's another prophecy too, isn't it? I mean about the stars falling in the last days. Baha'u'llah told them all that he was the Comforter, the Spirit of truth. He urged them to open their eyes and their hearts to the truth. Prophecy.
John 16th chapter, verse 13. "Howbeit when he, the Spirit of truth, is come, he will guide you into all truth. For he shall not speak of himself, but whatsoever he shall hear, that shall he speak."
Baha'u'llah spoke with the voice of God, as Jesus had spoken of old. Baha'u'llah wrote over 100 volumes on all aspects of life. He gave answers to the critical problems facing humanity. Baha'u'llah did indeed guide men to all truth. And Baha'u'llah spoke as Christ said he would speak, as bidden by the Almighty. Baha'u'llah told us that this message was greater than himself, that it came from God. Baha'u'llah addressed the leaders of humanity and urged them to put into effect these teachings and the laws of God for the protection, the welfare, and the betterment of all mankind. Baha'u'llah rebuked the Christians for their neglect. He said, "Heard ye not the words of Jesus concerning the Spirit of truth? Why then, when I came unto you, did you turn aside from me?" Here is yet another prophecy. Christ is speaking to us. Listen.
John chapter 16, verse 14. "He shall glorify me, for he shall receive of mine, and shall show it unto you."
Baha'u'llah did just that. He took the pure teachings of Christ, and he showed the world their wonderful meaning and their application for today. Baha'u'llah glorified the greatness of Christ.
Did you know that in one book alone, a book called The Promulgation of Universal Peace, which records the talks which Abdu'l-Baha, the son of Baha'u'llah, gave in America, there are over 100 references to His Holiness Christ.
In one book turned towards him. End of quotation. Baha'u'llah did indeed testify of Christ. He glorified Jesus in a way that no one had done before or since. Is it any wonder that Baha'u'llah should say to the Christians, "Read ye the Evangel, the Gospel, and yet refuse to acknowledge the All-Glorious"? Those are Baha'u'llah's words. Those who are spiritually blind in this day and prevent others from accepting the truth of Baha'u'llah's coming are like those blind leaders of the blind mentioned by Christ. Christ said, when the blind lead the blind, both fall into the ditch. Don't let it happen to you. Baha'u'llah is still calling out to the Christians. He says, and these are his words,
"Verily he, Jesus, said, Come after me, and I will make you to become fishers of men." In this day, however, we say, "Come ye after me, that we may make you to become quickeners of mankind."
Open the doors of your hearts, Baha'u'llah writes to the Christians of the world. For he who was the Spirit, Jesus, verily standeth before them. We in truth have opened unto you the gates of the kingdom. Will ye bar the doors of your houses in my face? When Baha'u'llah reached the Holy Land, a prisoner and an exile, he referred to Bethlehem, the birthplace of Christ. There was he, Baha'u'llah, the glory of God, the return of Christ, standing in the Holy Land, the place prophesied for him in the last days, on the mountain of God. He had fulfilled all of the prophecies. The glory of God had come from the east by way of the gate. Yet the people sought only his destruction, as they had sought that of Jesus before him. Baha'u'llah, as quoted in the book, The Promised Day Is Come, cried out,
O Bethlehem, this light hath risen in the Orient, the east, and travelled toward the Occident, the west, until it reached thee in the evening of its life. Tell me then, do the sons recognize the Father, Baha'u'llah, and acknowledge him, or do they deny him, even as the people aforetime denied him, Jesus, the Son?
What a beautiful, tender, sad, sweet story. It is tragic, but it is full of power and majesty. Baha'u'llah has gone on from victory to victory. Those who opposed him have gone from defeat to defeat. His faith has circled the entire planet. Doesn't it make you eager to rush out into the pioneering field and to teach and to tell everybody the glad tidings? Perhaps in the light of these wonderful prophecies and their fulfillment, many of those of you who have followed this study class, those of you who are not yet Baha'is, perhaps now already in your hearts you are Baha'is. Good. Perhaps you too now realize that Baha'u'llah is the promised one, the return of Christ. Then you are ready to become Baha'is. We welcome you into this wonderful worldwide family.
I'm sorry, Bill, but that's all the time we have left for today.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry too, because I was just about to tell the story of the most amazing and exciting prophecies about Baha'u'llah that can be found in any of the sacred scriptures. And it's all in one book of the Old Testament, the book of Micah. I call him the amazing Micah. So will you when you hear what Micah had to say about Baha'u'llah. If we heard nothing more than this one prophecy, we would be convinced that Baha'u'llah was indeed the promised one of the last days, the Messiah, the Christ returned. So let's save that dramatic story for tomorrow. Have a good time talking over today's prophecies, and we'll see you all tomorrow. Maybe tomorrow you'd like to bring some more of your friends to hear the wondrous story. They'll never hear another like it as long as they live. We need them, and they need us. We all need Baha'u'llah and the Baha'i Faith, for it is the hope of the world. Until tomorrow then, goodbye. Remember us in your prayers tonight.
It is now time to begin our third day together. We will hear more wonderful prophecies fulfilled by Baha'u'llah, the glory of God, the founder of the Baha'i Faith. Today we promise to tell you about the amazing Micah, so let us begin.
I devoted an entire chapter to Micah in one of my books. I called him the amazing Micah. But this one prophecy that we're going to talk to you about today, this one alone, is more than enough to inspire every sincere seeker to want to know more about Baha'u'llah and to rise up and serve this wonderful Redeemer of mankind. Listen, and you will see how the Old Testament prophet Micah foretells Baha'u'llah's coming so accurately.
Micah describes almost every step along the path which Baha'u'llah took when he was driven by the kings of Persia and Turkey from his homeland in Persia to Israel, the Holy Land. Micah also tells us exactly how many years Baha'u'llah would tell the people of the world about his message. Imagine that.
Imagine that. If you were to go to the automobile club and ask for a road map so you could drive from Los Angeles to Chicago, say, you would not receive clearer instructions than those which Micah gave to the world and to us, so that we might recognize Baha'u'llah when he came and accept his message and become one of his followers. Now, let's see exactly what the Bible says in that single remarkable chapter of Micah. You can read along, if you wish, from your own Bible. This is the King James Version that Marguerite, Mrs. Sears, and I are using. This is the 7th chapter of Micah. Marguerite, would you read that for us, please?
With pleasure. Chapter 7, verse 12 through 15. In that day also he shall come even to thee from Assyria, and from the fortified cities, and from the fortress even to the river, and from sea to sea, and from mountain to mountain. Notwithstanding, the land shall be desolate because of them that dwell therein, for the fruit of their doings. Feed thy people with thy rod, the flock of thine heritage, which dwells solitarily in the wood, in the midst of Carmel. According to the days of thy coming out of the land of Egypt, will I show unto him marvelous things.
And that's the end of the quotation, thank you. It's a little long that way, so now let's take that chapter and these verses in the light of Baha'u'llah's coming. And then you will begin to see why people everywhere are so eager to become Baha'is. Why they want to be part of this world-redeeming, exciting faith. Why they are entering the Baha'i Faith by the thousands these days, as they are everywhere. And imagine this, you future warriors of Baha'u'llah. Micah, in one single chapter, mind you, gives an astonishing answer to those who ridiculed him, Micah, in his day, for saying all of these things. They laughed at him, you know, at Micah, and they jeered at him, and they said, "Where is the Lord thy God?" And this is what Micah said to those who mocked him.
In that day, meaning the last days, in that day also he shall come even to thee from Assyria.
And that is exactly where Baha'u'llah came from. Baha'u'llah came from Persia. Part of the land now known as Persia was once in the geographic area of the ancient Assyrian kingdom. Micah tells us,
In that day also he shall come even to thee from the fortified cities.
Baha'u'llah did. He came in exactly that way. Baha'u'llah was exiled to the fortified city of Constantinople, and finally they sent him to the fortified city of Akka. This was a dreaded Turkish fortress of Akka. The kings thought surely that Baha'u'llah would die there, and would be heard of no more, and that it would be the end of his religion forever. But God had other plans. These pitiful kings did not even realize that they were fulfilling the prophecies from the Old Testament, the New Testament, from the Quran, the holy book of the Muslims, and from all the holy books. They drove Baha'u'llah, the glory of God, to Israel, the Holy Land. They hoped to end his faith. All they really did was fulfill prophecy after prophecy. They made Baha'u'llah's faith stronger and stronger. The more they did to end the Baha'i faith, the more they fulfilled the prophecies. In that same chapter, mind you, Micah says,
In that day also he shall come even to thee from the fortress even to the river.
Baha'u'llah did just that too. Can you believe it? Baha'u'llah was finally delivered by the hand of God. He was free from the mighty fortress prison of Akka, in which they had shut him up. When Baha'u'llah left the fortress prison of Akka, he went outside the city to a garden, now called the Garden of Rizwan. It was a garden that was surrounded by the waters of the ancient river Belus, a river now called in Israel Naman. So we see Baha'u'llah came from the fortress to the river, exactly as Micah foretold. And Micah didn't stop his prophecies there. No, he went still on with more. Micah is still speaking of the promised one.
In that day he shall come even to thee from sea to sea.
Did Baha'u'llah do that? He certainly did. Baha'u'llah was driven from sea to sea on his way to Israel. Baha'u'llah sailed on the Black Sea along the northern coast of Turkey on his exile to Constantinople. He crossed the Mediterranean Sea on his last exile to the Holy Land. Baha'u'llah, the glory of God, came to the very land to which the prophecies of old said the glory of God would come from the east. And there was Baha'u'llah at last in the Holy Land. He was driven there by his enemies, who, without knowing it, helped him, Baha'u'llah, to fulfill all these marvelous prophecies. It's almost too much, isn't it? What tremendous proofs from the holy books Baha'u'llah and the Baha'i Faith have brought us. No wonder the Baha'is are so enthusiastic and eager to tell this story. You can see why. The prophecies of Micah are still not finished, though. There's still more. And from that same single 7th chapter of Micah. Imagine it. Micah says,
In that day also he shall come even to thee from mountain to mountain.
Ask yourself, did Baha'u'llah do that too? Well, you can just bet he did. Exactly that. Just as His Holiness Christ withdrew into the desert before his mission began, so Baha'u'llah too withdrew. He went into the mountains of Kurdistan near Sulaymaniyah in Iraq. On Mount Sargalu in Iraq, Baha'u'llah revealed wonderful words and wonderful teachings.
Baha'u'llah came in exile from Mount Sargalu in Iraq to Mount Carmel in the Holy Land, from mountain to mountain, exactly as Micah had prophesied.
Baha'u'llah stood on the side of Mount Carmel, and he announced that the promises had been fulfilled. The promised one so long hidden from the mortal eyes of the world had now appeared, he said. There was no longer any excuse, Baha'u'llah's teachings declared, for mankind not to recognize the truth and to serve it. What a unique story. In the very next verse, still from that same chapter, Micah tells us another wonderful thing. He prophesies exactly how long God will have his messenger, his promised one, feed his flock in those last days. That seems almost incredible, doesn't it? But it's true. These are Micah's words. Micah says that God will show unto him, meaning the Redeemer, marvelous things. And how long will God do that? Micah tells us it will be for 40 years. Listen.
Feed thy people with thy rod, the flock of thine heritage, which dwells solitarily in the wood in the midst of Carmel, as in the days of old. According to the days of thy coming out of the land of Egypt, will I show unto him marvelous things.
For 40 years, Micah says. This is the length of the time the Jews spent coming out of the land of Egypt. 40 years. Baha'u'llah's mission on earth lasted exactly that length of time. 40 years. Isn't it marvelous? What amazing prophecies, what astonishing fulfillment. In the same chapter 14 of the book of Numbers, which tells how the Jews will wander in the wilderness for 40 years, it is also written that,
As truly as I live, all the earth shall be filled with the glory of the Lord.
Imagine that. In that day, the earth would be filled with the glory of the Lord. And that is what Baha'u'llah's name means, isn't it? The glory of the Lord. It was to him, Baha'u'llah, the glory of the Lord, that Micah said God would show wonderful things for 40 years. And he did. Baha'u'llah wrote over 100 volumes dealing with all the needs of mankind in a ministry lasting 40 years. And just so you can be absolutely sure that it is about Baha'u'llah and the Baha'i Faith, which this prophecy in the book of Numbers is referring, let us hear the words of the highly respected Jewish author and writer Maimonides, cited on page 75 of Messianic Speculation in Israel by A.H. Silver. Maimonides says, and we're quoting now,
The exact time for the coming of the Messiah is not known for a certainty, but there exists among us a great and wonderful tradition.
Did you hear that?
A great and wonderful tradition which I received from my father, and he in turn from his father, and his grandfather, who likewise received it, and so through a continuous chain to the beginning of the exile from Jerusalem. That in Balaam's statement, number 23:23, where it is said of Jacob and Israel, What hath God wrought, is found the key to the mystery.
In those words, what hath God wrought, Maimonides said, would be found the key to the mystery from that same book of Numbers. Prophecy at that time, Maimonides continues, will return to Israel, and the prophets will say, Behold what God hath wrought. Now, on May 24, 1844, Samuel Morse sent his first telegraph message flashing from Washington to Baltimore. The message was a quote from that book of Numbers. What quote? The exact same one mentioned by Maimonides, Numbers 23:23. What hath God wrought?
The very day before, May 23rd, 1844, The Baha'i Faith began in Persia. What a dramatic story!
During the 40 years of his mission, Baha'u'llah, as we said earlier, wrote over 100 volumes. He addressed letters and messages to the kings and rulers of the world, to the leaders of mankind, to the heads of great religions, to the peoples of these religions, and to the peoples of the world, to scholars, philosophers, students, to leaders in the intellectual, political, literary, mystical, commercial, humanitarian spheres of human activity. No one was left out. No one. Well, you tell me, was that feeding his flock or not? For 40 years exactly, God showed to Baha'u'llah wonderful things. Baha'u'llah shared these wonderful things, these teachings, with all mankind. And that's why we're here today as followers of this promised one, Baha'u'llah, the glory of God.
Isn't it long past time that everybody on earth heard this story?
Long past. And there's more. And believe it or not, there's still more. And it's still this same Micah talking. Micah prophesies of Baha'u'llah's coming in still another chapter. Micah promises in chapter 4, verse 1, that in the last days the house of the Lord will be established in the mountain. He says,
In the last days the house of the Lord shall be established in the top of the mountains, and people shall flow unto it.
Baha'u'llah's world center is established there on the side of the mountain of God. The supreme body which now directs the affairs of Baha'u'llah's faith in over 300 countries, territories, and islands of the seas, and probably even more now while we're talking with each other, so rapidly is this faith growing, is known by that name, house. It is called the Universal House of Justice of Baha'u'llah. Another prophet, Habakkuk, said, Prophecy,
Chapter 2, verse 14, For the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea.
That's what Baha'u'llah's name means, the glory of the Lord. His teachings are already covering the earth as the waters cover the sea. Thousands are entering beneath Baha'u'llah's banner in every part of the planet these days. Many nations will flow unto this house of the Lord, said Micah, and the law shall go forth from that mountain. The nations will come and say, Let us go up to the house of the Lord, and then God will teach us his ways. Are you listening?
Of course we should understand that the prophecy about the house of the Lord was fulfilled with the coming of Baha'u'llah. The house of the Lord was established as soon as Baha'u'llah appeared on that mountain. That is the fulfillment of the prophecy.
But that was only the beginning of the fulfillment. How much greater the fulfillment becomes when we see that Baha'u'llah himself, on the side of that mountain, called for a supreme, democratically elected administrative body to rule the affairs of the world. Baha'u'llah gave to the body its title, the Universal House. I tell you, this story is so fascinating and dramatic that no novel, no play, no widescreen motion picture or television story can compare with it. Let's hear a little more about justice and peace and about this great Messiah from chapter 9, verse 7 in the book of Isaiah.
Of the increase of his government and peace there shall be no end, upon the throne of David and upon his kingdom, to order it and to establish it with judgment and with justice.
Note the words, with justice.
And with justice from henceforth even forever.
Baha'u'llah reminded the people of this very prophecy of Isaiah. You will find it on pages 78-79 of The Promised Day Is Come. Baha'u'llah said to them, I'm quoting now, The most great law is come, and the ancient beauty ruleth upon the throne of David. Thus hath my pen spoken that which the histories of bygone ages have revealed. End of quotation. Let us clearly understand that this prophecy about the house of the Lord means much more than just the fulfillment of the prophecy of Baha'u'llah's coming, wonderful as that is. It plainly means that this house of the Lord would be a house in which the followers of the promised one would come and would work for the good of mankind in those last days. Yes, the remnant of God, those who believed in him, would return to Israel and would work in the house of the Lord. The scriptures say so. It is called not only the house of the Lord, but the house of the Lord of hosts. On page 95 of God Passes By, we are reminded that the Lord of Hosts was one of the titles of Baha'u'llah. We're quoting now.
Of him, Baha'u'llah, David had sung in his Psalms, acclaiming him as the Lord of Hosts and the King of Glory.
End of quotation. The Old Testament prophet Haggai, speaking of the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem, chapter 1, points out that there would be troublemakers who would say, I'm quoting his words now, "This people say the time is not come, the time that the Lord's house should be built." End of quotation. When that happens, the Lord of Hosts warns such people, saying, consider your ways. How well that applies to those who say the same thing about the time not being right now for the return of Christ or the building of the house. These words are from verses 13 and 14.
Then spake Haggai, the Lord's messenger, in the Lord's message unto the people, saying, I am with you, saith the Lord. And the spirit of all, the remnant of the people, came and did work in the house of the Lord of Hosts.
Yes, Baha'u'llah raised up the house of the Lord and called it a house of justice. He said that it would last down through the ages, bringing to mankind, in the very words of Isaiah, justice from henceforth, even forever. Now tell me, if you've ever heard anything like that before in all your life. Well, beloved friends, that ends our session for today, and on what a high note.
It brings us to the close of the third day of our study class about Baha'u'llah, the glory of God, the promised one of all religions. This means we're halfway through.
I promise you that what is yet to come is even more exciting than what you've already heard. Can you believe it? Well, it's true. The longer you are a Baha'i, the more wonderful your faith becomes. It's almost too beautiful and too wonderful to believe, but it's true. I know your friends will have many questions. Happily, the Baha'i Faith has excellent answers to share with them. Baha'u'llah, as Christ promised, has brought to light the hidden things of darkness. Everything is open and clear. Those of you who are not yet Baha'is, if you have heard these first 3 study classes and have followed along carefully, right now you know enough to become a follower of Baha'u'llah. You needn't wait any longer. If in your heart you really believe in Baha'u'llah and want to become a Baha'i, you are ready. There is, of course, much more to know, and the Baha'is will be happy to tell you all about it. You will learn about the institutions, the laws, the principles. There are many wonderful things to learn.
But if you sincerely believe in Baha'u'llah, that he is the promised messenger of God for today, that is the foundation upon which everything else can be built. It means you are now ready to enter his radiant spiritual army.
Today, right now, you can learn all the things you need to know to become a follower of Baha'u'llah. So ask the Baha'is who are here with you. Of course, it's only the beginning. There's a whole new, wonderful, exciting life ahead of you. But the beginning is this. Baha'u'llah is the return of Christ. He is the shepherd of God's worldwide flock today, the promised one. Upon that belief, as Marguerite said, upon that sincere belief, everything else can be built. So welcome to the world's most wonderful family. Perhaps we'll be fellow Baha'is when next we meet, and that will be tomorrow.
This is the 4th day in our week-long study class on the prophecies fulfilled by the coming of Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i Faith. To begin our 4th session, we have asked the Baha'i chorus to sing for us once again. This is a song that is filled with the spirit of prophecy, as you will soon see.
Marguerite,
Yes.
before the chorus sings this song, I wonder if I might just say a few words about it.
Of course.
The song is written about Baha'u'llah, of course, the Prince of Peace. It is about Baha'u'llah's coming to the prison city of Akka. We've already talked about these places, as you know. Isaiah and Hosea both prophesied about these places, prophecies which Baha'u'llah has fulfilled. It is sung by the Baha'i chorus under the direction of Mr. Russell Garcia. And that's another wonderful story.
I say so.
Russell, with his wife Gina Garcia, left their home in America and have been sailing through the islands of the South Pacific Ocean, visiting all those places mentioned in the writings of Abdu'l-Baha as places to which the message of Baha'u'llah should be carried. And that is what Mr. and Mrs. Garcia are doing. They are carrying the message of the blessed beauty Baha'u'llah, the glory of God, to the places and to the peoples in those remote islands of the South Pacific. So that makes it quite a song, doesn't it?
Okay.
So let's begin the fourth day of our study class with this beautiful song about Baha'u'llah, the glory of God, the Prince of Peace.
They call him the Prince of Peace. They call him the Prince of Peace. From Constantinople to Adrianople to Acca, the prison by the sea.
There lived a man across the ocean. There lived a man across the sea. He spoke of love. He spoke of justice. He spoke to man of unity.
They call him the Prince of Peace. They call him the Prince of Peace. From Constantinople to Adrianople to Acca, the prison by the sea.
His teaching spread from kings to laymen. His teaching spread to all mankind. His teaching stood in all religions and left no hopeless soul behind.
They call him the Prince of Peace. They call him the Prince of Peace. From Constantinople to Adrianople to Acca, the prison by the sea.
Remember, I told you earlier in the study class that Baha'u'llah himself said that he was the one about whom Isaiah was speaking in the Old Testament. Let us use this one prophecy of Isaiah about the Prince of Peace to show you how true these words are. This famous reference to the Prince of Peace comes from Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6. Prophecy.
For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace.
That prophecy is often read in Christian churches on Christmas Day. The prophecy is taken to be a reference to Christ, even though most of the things in the prophecy do not apply to His Holiness Christ. Now let's look at the prophecy once again. Now that the books have been unsealed, let us examine it phrase by phrase and see exactly to whom it does refer. Prophecy.
The government shall be upon his shoulder.
Christ made it clear that this certainly did not apply to him. Christ said, Render therefore unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. Christ also said, My kingdom is not of this world. But with Baha'u'llah, the government is upon his shoulder. Baha'u'llah undertook the entire reorganization of human society. He provided the institutions necessary to maintain it, as well as the authority and the guidance for its future. There are Baha'i local assemblies and national assemblies in all parts of the planet. There is an international, democratically elected supreme administrative body called the Universal House of Justice, established in the Holy Land, on the very mountain that Isaiah talked about. We've already heard part of that story. And as you know, that universal house of justice guides the worldwide affairs of the Baha'i Faith today. Christ said that his kingdom was not of this world. In his Lord's Prayer, Christ made it clear that the kingdom of God would appear on earth in the last days.
Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, in earth as it is in heaven.
The beginning of this kingdom of God on earth has already taken place. The Baha'i Faith, guided by the teachings of Baha'u'llah, has already begun to establish this Christ-promised kingdom of God on earth in every continent, in over 300 countries, territories, and islands, and in some 50,000 centers, more than 50,000 centers, all around the world. And it's only the beginning. These figures are already obsolete as the Baha'i Faith goes from victory to victory. Baha'u'llah himself wrote, "Followers of the gospel, the Father hath come. That which ye were promised in the kingdom of God is fulfilled." In yet another place, the Baha'i writings speak of Baha'u'llah's Christ-promised kingdom of God on earth. What about the next phrase in this prophecy of Isaiah, Marguerite?
And his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God.
Almost all of these phrases Christ himself specifically repudiated, didn't he?
Yes, of course.
It's as though Christ wanted to make certain that such mistaken references to himself would not mislead people in the day of his return. Christ disclaimed being the mighty God when he called himself the Son of God. Christ was not the counselor. His message was a beautiful one of love to the individual, to draw mankind back to God. Baha'u'llah, on the other hand, was the counselor. His message was one of justice for society. It was for all mankind. Baha'u'llah himself wrote of his counsels to the rulers of men. He even called them that, counsels, saying,
O kings of the earth, if ye pay no heed unto the counsels which we have revealed, the sentence of his, God's justice, shall be pronounced against you. Have mercy on yourselves and on those beneath you.
End of quotation. You will find this entire letter to the kings of the earth on pages 2023 of a book called The Promised Day is Come. What about the next phrase of Isaiah's prophecy?
The everlasting Father.
Well, if there's anything clear, it is this, that Christ did not consider himself the Father. Jesus continually differentiated between himself and the Father. In many such references, such as, Him that sent me, My Father is greater than I go unto the Father, I will pray the Father, I do nothing of myself, but as my Father hath taught me. Jesus made it abundantly clear that no prophecy about the Father could refer to him. Christ even stated specifically that the Father had knowledge which was not possessed by the Son, saying,
But of that day and that hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels which are in heaven, neither the Son, but the Father.
Although it is plain that in most of these references Christ is speaking of God when he speaks of the Father, even so, Jesus made it equally plain that just as he, Christ, had come in the station of the Son, the time would come in the last days when he, Christ, would return in the station of the Father. He told us this in the 8th chapter of Mark, verse 38.
When he, the Son of Man, cometh in the glory of his Father.
Matthew, in the 25th chapter of his book, says plainly that this will be the day when the Son of Man shall come in his glory, and before him shall be gathered all nations. Watch, therefore, Christ warned his followers, for ye know neither the day nor the hour wherein the Son of Man cometh. And so that you will without doubt know that Baha'u'llah did tell the world of Christianity that he was the Father, the one foretold by Christ, let me share with you a few more of his words. These words were written to one of the supreme heads of Christianity, Pope Pius IX of Rome. These are the words of Baha'u'llah. The word which the Son Jesus concealed is made manifest. It hath been sent down in the form of a human temple in this day. Blessed be the Lord, who is the Father. He verily is come unto the nations in his most great majesty. This is the day whereon the rock, Peter, crieth out and shouteth, saying, Lo, the Father is come, and that which ye were promised in the kingdom is fulfilled. All right. Now, Marguerite, what about that last phrase in the prophecy of Isaiah? What did Isaiah say?
He said, and his name shall be called the Prince of Peace.
All right, now we're down to it. The Prince of Peace, not Christ, surely. Jesus in Matthew 10:34 said plainly, Think not that I am come to send peace on earth. I came not to send peace, but a sword. Christ also said, Luke 12:51, Suppose ye that I am come to give peace on earth? I tell you nay, but rather division. Baha'u'llah, on the other hand, did come to bring peace on earth. Baha'u'llah gave us the laws, the principles, the agencies, the institutions, and the teachings in his many volumes of his writings by which world peace could be established and permanently secured for all men. To a famous Christian scholar and Orientalist, E.G. Brown of Cambridge University, who met Baha'u'llah in Israel, when he, Baha'u'llah, was there as a prisoner, Baha'u'llah said plainly,
These ruinous wars shall pass away, and the most great peace shall come.
Let me share with you a few more words of Baha'u'llah on this subject, so there can be no doubt about his call to the rulers of the world for peace. On page 26 of The Promised Day Is Come, Baha'u'llah says, O rulers of the earth, be reconciled among yourselves, that ye may need no more armaments, save in a measure to safeguard your territories and dominions. Beware lest ye disregard the counsels of the all-knowing, the faithful. End of quotation. And yet again, quote, My object, this is Baha'u'llah speaking, my object is none other than the betterment of the world and the tranquility of its peoples. The well-being of mankind, its peace and security, are unattainable unless and until its unity is firmly established. This unity can never be achieved so long as the counsels which the pen of the Most High hath revealed are suffered to pass unheeded. End of quotation. And so we see peace, disarmament, and once again the counsels of the counselor in the words of Baha'u'llah. In the book Gleanings from the Writings of Baha'u'llah,
End of quotation.
And then Baha'u'llah goes on to call for arbitration, for disarmament. Baha'u'llah warns the kings of their downfall if they fail to heed his counsels. In that same book, Baha'u'llah also addressed the democratic bodies of the world, calling upon them to build that same peace and unity. He said,
O ye elected representatives of the people in every land, take ye counsel together, and let your concern be only for that which profiteth mankind, and bettereth the condition thereof.
Isn't that wonderful?
That which the Lord hath ordained as sovereign remedy and mightiest instrument for the healings of all the world is the union of all its peoples in one universal cause, one common faith.
End of quotation. Baha'u'llah called mankind to the day of the one fold and the one shepherd, promised in the sacred scriptures. He gave to the leaders of men all the guidance, the laws, the agencies, the institutions they needed to establish and preserve peace on earth. So Baha'u'llah was indeed the Prince of Peace. Baha'u'llah also called for the establishment of a world body over a century ago. In fact, the Charter of the United Nations, the body whose primary aim is to establish and preserve the peace of the world, has certain paragraphs that sound as though Baha'u'llah himself had been the author of their charter. Yet it falls far short of the wonderful teachings and counsels of Baha'u'llah.
The same is true for the Declaration of Human Rights of the United Nations.
Right. Furthermore, those principles for which Pope John XXIII received the Nobel Prize in his encyclical Peace on Earth are all principles of Baha'u'llah. Almost all of them are principles of the Baha'i Faith. They are principles which Baha'u'llah gave to the world over 100 years ago. Isn't that astonishing? In fact, Baha'u'llah addressed a message to the Pope himself and called upon him, the Pope, to leave the Vatican and proclaim the oneness of religion and the peace of mankind. Approximately 100 years later, Pope Paul VI left the Vatican on a similar mission without knowing the source of his inspiration, and probably blissfully unaware of those words of Baha'u'llah to his predecessor, Pope Pius IX.
Lo, the Father is come, and that which ye were promised in the kingdom is fulfilled.
What a tremendous widescreen, full-color spectacle the story of Baha'u'llah's coming would make for the films, the movies. What drama there is in the story of the martyrdom of his herald, the Bab, by a regiment of 750 soldiers. The rifle volley merely severed the ropes that bound him and freed the Bab without a scratch. The story of Baha'u'llah's scourging, stoning, poisoning, exile, and imprisonment. Wonderful. The tragic suffering of more than 20,000 believers who gave their lives as martyrs in a few years. In fact, there were more early followers sacrificed in this faith in 2 years than in all the 8 long years of the worst persecution of the Christians by the Roman Emperor Diocletian. Did you know that? Nothing can match this wonderful story of Baha'u'llah for suspense, for drama, and beauty. And now we see that this song we heard at the start of today's session, "They Called Him the Prince of Peace," is even a more beautiful song than we ever imagined when we first heard the chorus sing it. From Constantinople to Adrianople and to Akka, the prison by the sea, describing Baha'u'llah's journey to that land spoken of by Isaiah, by the book of Psalms, and by the prophet Hosea.
Isaiah said that this spot would be, in his words, a place for the herds to lie down in, for my people that have sought me.
And the book of Psalms spoke of the city of Akka when David sang of the strong city, saying,
Who will bring me into the strong city?
Baha'u'llah, as described on page 79 of The Promised Day Is Come, addressed a religious leader, saying,
Lend an ear unto the song of David. He saith, Who will bring me into the strong city?
Baha'u'llah continues,
The strong city is Akka, which hath been named the most great prison, and which possesseth a fortress and mighty ramparts.
The prophet Hosea also spoke of this spot, saying that it would be, in his words, a door of hope. What are Hosea's exact words, Marguerite?
2nd chapter, taken from verses 15 and 23. And I will give the valley of Akka for a door of hope, and I will say to them which were not my people, Thou art my people, and they shall say, Thou art my God.
Now that's really fascinating, isn't it? Abdu'l-Baha tells us that this valley of Akka refers to the city of Akka. Almost all of this fulfillment of prophecy has stemmed from just that one verse in the 9th chapter of Isaiah about the wonderful, the counselor, the Prince of Peace. And see what it has led us to. No wonder it's exciting to be a Baha'i in these days and to believe in Baha'u'llah. I'm sure that by now you see why it's not possible to give you more than just a small sample of the wonder of Baha'u'llah's coming as foreseen in all the holy books of the past. There is much more to tell, and you can hear all of it later. But even this one small study class of these days must gladden your heart and inspire your friends to want to enter the ranks of the kingdom of God on earth as foretold by Christ. The next 2 paragraphs from the Baha'i writings will help you to understand how impossible it is in such a study class as this to do more than just take one leaf from the tree of prophecy fulfilled by Baha'u'llah. First, from The Promised Day Has Come, page 78. These are the words of Baha'u'llah.
The time foreordained unto the peoples and kindreds of the earth is now come. The promises of God as recorded in the Holy Scriptures have all been fulfilled. This is the day which the pen of the Most High hath glorified in all the Holy Scriptures. There is no verse in them that doth not declare the glory of his holy name, and no book that doth not testify unto the loftiness of this most exalted theme.
Imagine that. No verse in them, no book, but that it testifies to Baha'u'llah. And on pages 111, 112 of the World Order of Baha'u'llah, we find these words. All the signs have been revealed. Every prophetic illusion hath been manifested. Whatever hath been enshrined in all the scriptures of the past hath been made evident. To doubt or hesitate is no more possible. Time is pressing. The divine charger is impatient and can tarry no longer. Ours is the duty to rush forward, and ere it is too late, win the victory. End of quotation. So this is the day and this is the hour. Baha'u'llah said to the Christians, do not tarry at the gate. We hope that many of you listening to our voices will want to become Baha'is right now, right away, as soon as is possible. And that brings us to the end of today's session.
We hope that those of you who are listening will now continue this session and have a stimulating discussion about the prophecies you've heard today.
Perhaps in the light of this story, many of you who are friends of the Baha'is and studying with them will want to hear more about Baha'u'llah, so that you too may become followers of this promised one, Baha'u'llah, the Redeemer of